I remember the first time I heard about the letter. People said it was ordinary, just paper sealed inside an envelope the color of fading winter daylight. Nothing that should have held the weight of an entire life. Yet the moment I touched it, I felt an uneasiness slow as a cold breath crawling beneath the skin. The kind that does not frighten but unsettles, as if the past itself were reaching forward in silence. The envelope had been found wedged behind a rusted metal panel in an abandoned post office scheduled for demolition. Discovered by chance when a worker pried open a corner warped by rainwater. Bright holiday decorations had once covered the walls there, but now everything smelled of mold and forgotten footsteps. The envelope was brittle, its edges curled like old leaves, its handwriting elegant yet trembling. It was dated December 24th, 47 years earlier. A Christmas message written by someone who clearly expected it to arrive before morning. As I looked at it, the world around me seemed to hush, the sounds of machinery fading into a distant hum. There are moments when the past leans close enough for us to sense its pulse, when the weight of a single untold story presses against our chest as if asking to be heard. Holding that letter felt exactly like that. A whisper from someone who had vanished long before I was born. Someone hoping their words might still reach a destination even time had forgotten. Before I unfold this story, before we journey through the echoes hidden inside that envelope, I want to speak directly to you, the one listening now. Stories like this only breathe fully when shared with others who appreciate their quiet shadows, their unexpected warmth, their subtle tremors. If you are here, it means you understand the strange pull that old memories can have, especially those linked to winter nights and unanswered messages. It would help our growing community immensely if you subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories that dig beneath the surface of forgotten moments. A simple like tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling matters to you. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment sharing the city and country you are watching from. I genuinely want to know how far this voice travels and where these stories find a home. Your interaction shapes how many others discover narratives like this one. Narratives that slip quietly into the heart and linger there, not for their darkness alone, but for their ability to reveal something tender buried beneath the years. So take a moment, support the channel, and allow yourself to settle into the quiet unfolding of this tale. Now we return to the night the envelope was discovered, a night colder than usual, when the wind scraped through broken windows of the abandoned building and seemed to carry with it the murmur of stories long overdue. The letter was brought to me by someone who knew my affinity for lost things, particularly messages that never reached the people they were meant for. I studied the envelope beneath a warm lamp as rain tapped against the glass like soft knuckles, asking to be let in. The handwriting felt intimate even before I read a single word, as if the sender had paused multiple times while addressing it, uncertain or possibly hopeful in a way that clung to the ink. The paper carried a faint scent of cedar, though that may have been my imagination trying to fill the silence. I slid a finger beneath the brittle flap and felt it give way almost reluctantly, as if protecting something fragile inside. The letter within was folded neatly, its creases sharp and deliberate despite the decades of neglect. When I unfolded it, the ink looked faint but still legible, each stroke pressed with intention. It began with a name I did not recognize, but spoken with such tenderness that I whispered it aloud, without meaning to, as if afraid the air might shatter its fragile presence. The words beneath it tugged me into a story that felt too personal to read and too important to ignore. The writer spoke of a promise made during a previous winter, a vow to deliver news that could not wait any longer, news meant to change a life. Their voice on the page carried both urgency and regret, woven so tightly that I sensed the writer had hesitated before sealing the envelope. All those years ago, the letter mentioned a journey interrupted by something unnamed, a moment where the writer almost turned back, but chose instead to push forward with determination. That felt heavy in each sentence. As I read, I felt as if I were intruding on someone else's private heartbeat. Yet a deeper instinct told me that the letter wanted to be read, that it had waited too long for someone to finally open it. The message inside was incomplete, ending mid-sentence, as though the writer had run out of time. And in that unfinished line, in the gap where the next words should have been, I felt a jolt of recognition. This was not simply a message lost. It was a message interrupted. I leaned back in my chair, the dim glow of the lamp tracing gentle shadows across the room. Questions bloomed quietly and insistently. Who had written this letter? Who was meant to receive it? What truth had been carried toward a destination that never saw its rival? And why had the writer stopped mid-sentence, leaving behind a silence more powerful than any confession? I placed the letter beside me and inhaled the scent of old paper, feeling its weight deepen with every passing second. Something inside me shifted, a subtle pull toward the story still hidden beneath those faded lines. I knew then the next step would be to find the person the letter had been meant for, or the nearest surviving relative. A letter undelivered is a story unfinished, and I felt compelled to finish it, even if it took me deep into the winter of a life I knew nothing about. The next morning, I carried the letter with me as I walked through streets still glistening with last night's rain. The sky hung low and pale, the kind of morning where the world feels quieter than usual, as if holding its breath while waiting for something unseen. I visited the public records office, a brick building with tall windows fogged by the warmth inside. As I stepped through the doors, the scent of old documents and polished wood wrapped around me like a familiar welcome. I approached a clerk seated behind a counter stacked with folders that seemed older than both of us combined. When I spoke the name I had read at the top of the letter, there was a flicker of recognition in the clerk's expression, a subtle shift that made me lean forward. It was faint, the kind of reaction a person has when remembering a detail tucked away in the corner of their memory. He excused himself and returned moments later with a slim binder whose edges were softened by time. He laid it gently before me, as if aware that its contents might be meaningful. I opened it carefully and began scanning through the pages, unsure what I hoped to find but unable to turn away. The binder contained fragments of a life lived quietly, a collection of records belonging to a woman whose name matched the one on the letter. There were old address listings, employment details, and notes about a small shop she used to run near the waterfront. The more I read, the more a picture began to form, not just of her but of the world she inhabited. It felt like following faint footprints in snow, each one leading deeper into a story that wanted to be remembered. I learned that she had passed away many years earlier, leaving behind no close relatives. Her home had been emptied and sold, her belongings scattered or discarded. The realization settled heavily on me, the kind of quiet sadness that comes from discovering a life that faded, without anyone to hold its memories. Yet something in the binder caught my attention. A series of scribbled notes clipped to the final page. They referenced a name I had not yet seen, a person who appeared to have played a significant role in her life. And beneath that name was an address. The address led me to a small neighborhood on the outskirts of the town, a place where homes seemed to carry stories in the peeling paint on their porches and the silent echoes within their windows. The winter air was crisp as I approached the house. Its roof bowed slightly under the weight of years. A soft breeze stirred a wind chime hanging near the door, its delicate sound filling the quiet afternoon. I knocked gently, unsure who, if anyone, might answer. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with thoughtful eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the frame. When I spoke the name from the binder, his expression shifted in a way that told me I had stepped into something deeply personal. He invited me inside with a nod, leading me through a hallway lined with faded photographs capturing fragments of a life shared with people who now existed only in memory. We sat at a small kitchen table illuminated by a window overlooking a winter garden, where the last remnants of autumn clung stubbornly to the branches. I placed the letter on the table, and when he saw it, he inhaled sharply, as though he had been waiting decades for something he never expected to return. His fingers hovered above the paper before he finally touched it, the brush of his skin so gentle it seemed like an act of reverence. He asked where I had found it, and as I explained, his eyes glistened with a mixture of surprise and something heavier, something almost like gratitude. He told me that the woman from the binder had once been the most important person in his life, though time and circumstance had forced them in different directions. When I asked about the unfinished sentence in the letter, he looked away for a moment, gathering words carefully as if afraid they might break. He began to share fragments of their story, each one unfolding slowly like the pages of a book long forgotten, but still alive in his memory. They had met during a winter much colder than the current one, their connection immediate yet delicate, forged through shared routines and long conversations held over steaming cups of coffee. He described her laughter as warmth in human form, something that could soften even the harshest days. But life, as it often does, had taken unexpected turns. A job opportunity forced him to move away, and though they promised to write, letters grew fewer as responsibilities multiplied. He had always wondered if she ever forgave him for leaving. Hearing this, I realized that the letter in my possession might hold answers he had lived without for decades. He hesitated before agreeing to read the letter aloud, his voice faltering slightly as he unfolded the fragile paper. The room felt suspended in time as he spoke the words she had written, each sentence filling the air with a tenderness that reached far beyond the years. When he reached the unfinished line, he stopped, swallowing hard. He said he believed she had been about to share something life-changing, a truth she had waited too long to reveal. His eyes glistened once more as he placed the letter gently on the table, the silence between us deepening with unspoken possibilities. I sensed that hearing her voice again, even through faded ink, had reopened a part of him he thought had closed forever. As the afternoon light dimmed, he told me he wanted to show me something. He stood slowly and motioned for me to follow him down a narrow hallway leading to a room, filled with boxes neatly stacked and labeled. He reached for one marked with her name and opened it with the same carefulness. He had shown the letter. Inside were photographs, postcards, small trinkets, and a handful of envelopes tied together with a thin ribbon. He untied it with trembling hands, revealing letters she had written but never sent. One by one, he shared them with me, each containing pieces of her thoughts, fears, and moments she wished she could have expressed. Together, they painted a picture of a woman who carried a quiet strength and a longing that stretched across the years. As we continued reading, a pattern began to emerge, a subtle thread weaving through each letter. She had been preparing to tell him something important, something she struggled to articulate fully. The letters carried hints of it, whispers of a truth that remained just out of reach. Yet in all the words she had written, both sent and unsent, there was a deep affection that never wavered. I sensed that whatever the unfinished sentence in the letter meant, it was connected to something she had carried silently for far too long. The realization filled the room with an unspoken weight, the kind that lingers even after the story ends. We spent hours in that quiet room, the soft ticking of a clock blending with the faint creak of the old house, settling into the winter evening. As he unfolded each letter, a fragile stillness settled between us, as if the air itself were listening closely. I watched the way his hands shook slightly when he touched each envelope, not from age alone, but from the weight of reopening a story he had sealed away long ago. Outside, the daylight dimmed into a soft gray, casting gentle shadows across the floor. The letters spoke of ordinary days filled with small regrets and quiet hopes. Yet beneath their simplicity was an undercurrent of something deeper, a truth she never managed to fully confess. With every page we read, the sense grew stronger that the unfinished sentence in the Christmas letter had been her final attempt to reveal what she had held inside for so many years. It made me wonder what moments in life slip by without our realizing they are the ones we will revisit endlessly, wishing we had understood them sooner. He closed the last envelope and sat in silence, his gaze drifting to the window where the first hints of night had begun to appear. The winter garden outside looked still, untouched, as if the world had paused in recognition of the moment unfolding inside the house. He whispered that he had always sensed she held something unspoken, something that lingered in the spaces between their conversations. A part of him had believed she would share it if given more time, But life had moved forward in its relentless way, and the chance had slipped away. Hearing him speak, I felt a quiet ache that did not belong to me yet settled into the room like a memory returning. Home. There was something profoundly human in the way he looked back on the past, not with anger or bitterness, but with a gently worn sadness that seemed shaped by years of wondering. After a while, he stood and walked toward a cabinet tucked in the corner of the room. He opened it carefully and retrieved a wooden box polished smooth from years of handling. He carried it to the table and placed it before me with deliberate care. Inside was a collection of small objects she had given him during their time together, each one representing a moment, a shared laughter, a memory preserved. There was a ticket stub from a winter fair, its colors faded but still visible, a small silver charm shaped like a star, and a folded paper crane she had made during a long afternoon, spent talking about dreams they feared voicing aloud. As he handled each item, his voice softened, as if he were speaking not to me but to the years that had passed between them. It was clear these tokens were not simply keepsakes, but fragments of a life that had once intertwined with his in ways he still carried quietly. Among the objects was a second envelope, yellowed by age but sealed tightly. He held it with a mixture of caution and longing, explaining that he had found it shortly after she passed away, but had never brought himself to open it. The handwriting on the front matched the Christmas letter, but the date was different, written several months earlier. He said he had always wondered if opening it would clarify the silence she left behind, yet something in him feared discovering a truth he might not be ready to face. I encouraged him gently, reminding him that the letter had waited long enough. With a slow breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside, his eyes scanning the words with an intensity shaped by decades of unanswered questions. As he read, his expression shifted in subtle ways, the kind that speak louder than spoken words. His posture straightened slightly, his eyes glistened, and his breathing grew unsteady. I waited, unsure whether to speak or remain silent, until he finally placed the letter on the table and let his hands fall into his lap. He said the letter revealed that she had planned to visit him that winter, bringing with her something she described as a truth she could no longer keep hidden. She had written about wanting to correct mistakes, to speak openly about the feelings she never fully expressed. But the letter also mentioned an unexpected obstacle, something that had delayed her journey and left her uncertain of the right moment to approach him. She ended by saying she hoped the future would give them a chance to reconnect, even if she did not know when or how. The words carried a poignancy that settled deeply into the room. I saw how they affected him, how the revelation both comforted and unsettled him. He said that reading her intentions felt like hearing her voice again, a voice that had waited far too long to be heard. The truth she had carried, whatever it was, remained unfinished in both letters, leaving behind a silence that felt painfully alive. Yet the knowledge that she had wanted to return, that she had not forgotten him after all those years, brought a faint light to his expression. It was as if a missing piece of his life had finally been returned, even if it arrived decades later than expected. We sat quietly, allowing the moment to breathe. The house seemed to listen with us, the soft hum of the heater and the faint creak of settling wood creating a gentle rhythm. He spoke again, saying he believed the unfinished sentence in the Christmas letter had been her final attempt to say something she had once feared, but later regretted withholding. Perhaps she had intended to share an apology, a confession, or a revelation about a decision she had made long ago. The possibilities lingered in the air, each one carrying its own shadow. But he said the most important thing was not what had gone unsaid, but the fact that she had tried. Her words, though incomplete, revealed that she had reached for a truth she hoped would bring them closer, even if she never had the chance to finish it. As the night deepened, he thanked me for bringing the letter to him, for returning a piece of his past he believed lost. He admitted he had lived with unanswered questions for so long that he had almost forgotten how it felt to seek closure. Yet now, holding the letters and keepsakes, he seemed to rediscover a sense of connection that time had nearly eroded. He asked if I would stay a little longer, not out of obligation, but because sharing the story with someone who cared made the wait easier to carry. I agreed, feeling a quiet responsibility to honor the journey the letter had taken to reach this moment. We talked late into the evening, sharing thoughts about the strange ways life brings people together and later pulls them apart. He said he wondered whether she had ever doubted sending the original letter, whether she had feared the possibility that he might not respond. I shared my belief that she had written it with hope, trusting that the message would find him eventually. And though it had taken 47 years, it finally had. He smiled softly, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and gratitude. It was clear that the story held more than loss. It held a quiet reminder that some connections endure even when time scatters their threads. The next morning, the house felt different, not brighter exactly, but lighter in a way that suggested something once tangled had begun to loosen. Sunlight filtered through the curtains in soft threads, touching the wooden table where the letters now rested in a neat stack. He entered the room slowly, his steps measured, as if adjusting to a world that no longer carried the same weight it had the day before. I watched him stand before the table, his posture thoughtful as he traced a gentle hand across the envelopes. He said he had barely slept, not out of restlessness, but because reading the letters had stirred memories he had forgotten. He still held. He felt as though he had found a part of himself he did not realize was missing. Hearing him speak, I sensed that the letters had done more than reconnect him to the past. They had given him permission to revisit a version of himself shaped by sincerity and hope, rather than regret. He asked if we might return to the abandoned post office together, the place where the Christmas letter had waited in silence for nearly half a century. I agreed, sensing that going back would offer a sense of closure. We drove through quiet streets, the frost on the windows catching the morning light like thin threads of silver. When we arrived, the building looked as it had before, a skeleton of its former self, its walls worn by wind and rain, yet still standing with quiet resilience. We stepped inside carefully, the air thick with the scent of dust and old timber. The space seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something important was about to unfold. He looked around slowly, absorbing the remnants of a place that had once been filled with voices, stories, and the steady rhythm of letters moving from one life to another. He walked to the corner where the panel had been pried open, the place where the envelope had slipped into darkness so many years earlier. He crouched down and touched the floor, as though searching for traces of a moment frozen in time. I watched him close his eyes, imagining the day she had placed the letter into the postal system with hope, expecting it would reach him within days. Instead, it had vanished into the shadows, held captive by circumstance until chance and decay delivered it into my hands. The enormity of that accident hung in the silence between us. He whispered that he wondered how their lives might have changed if the letter had reached him when intended. It was a question that offered no answer, yet something in the way he asked it suggested he no longer sought one. As we prepared to leave, he paused in the doorway and looked back one last time. He said that the building no longer felt haunted by what had been lost. Instead, it felt like a place where something long delayed had finally been acknowledged. We stepped outside into the cold, the wind brushing against us with gentle insistence, and he breathed deeply, as though drawing strength from the very air. He thanked me again, not just for finding the letter, but for choosing to follow its story rather than discard it as a curiosity. He said he believed that some things arrive precisely when they are meant to, even if the timing appears painfully imperfect. I found myself agreeing, sensing that the letter's journey had been shaped by something larger than misfortune alone. Later that afternoon, we sat once more at his kitchen table, the letters spread out before us like a map leading back to a life woven with fragile threads. He said he wished he could speak to her one more time, not to ask questions, but simply to tell her that her words had finally reached him. I told him that, in a way, she had spoken through every faded line and unfinished sentence, and that he had answered her by opening them with care rather than resentment. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant yet calm. He asked if I believed people could feel the impact of a truth, delivered long after its intended time. I said I believed truth has its own patience, its own way of waiting until someone is ready to receive it. In that moment, he looked younger somehow, softened by acceptance rather than weighed down by longing. That evening, as the last colors of the sky surrendered to darkness, he asked if we might read the Christmas letter together one final time. I unfolded it gently, smoothing its delicate creases, and began to read aloud. The words filled the room with a quiet warmth, each sentence carrying the echo of who she had been. When I reached the unfinished line, the silence that followed felt different from before. It no longer carried the ache of what was missing, but the tenderness of what had been shared. He closed his eyes, listening not to what was absent, but to the intention behind what she had written. He whispered that he finally understood. She had not failed to finish the sentence. Life had simply intervened, and though the story she meant to tell remained incomplete, the emotion behind it had arrived intact. He asked if I thought he should keep the letters or donate them to an archive. I said the decision belonged to him alone, that the letters were pieces of his own history as much as hers. After a moment of thought, he gathered them carefully and placed them into the wooden box from earlier, tying a ribbon around it with deliberate care. He said he wanted to keep them close, not as reminders of what might have been, but as symbols of a connection that had endured beyond time, distance, and silence. He placed the box on a shelf near the window where the morning sun could find it each day. Seeing this, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the letters had finally found their rightful place. As the night deepened, it became time for me to leave. He walked me to the door, the winter air drifting inside as he opened it. He thanked me once more, and I sensed his gratitude was not simply for the letter, but for the act of witnessing a story that had waited nearly half a century to be heard. I stepped outside, the cold brushing against my face, and looked back to see him standing in the doorway, framed by the warm light of his home. In that moment, I realized the letter's journey had changed more than one destiny. It had reminded us both of the quiet power held in words that never reach their destination, and the unexpected ways they can return to us when we most need them. As I walked away, snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes, drifting through the air with a softness that felt almost deliberate. The world around me grew quiet, the kind of quiet that invites reflection rather than loneliness. I found myself thinking about all the moments in life shaped by accidents, delays, and missed chances, and how some of them carry meanings we do not understand until years later. The letter had been lost for 47 years, trapped in a forgotten corner of a building no one visited, yet its purpose had survived. It had delivered a truth that did not need completion to be understood. And as I continued down the street, the snow settling on my shoulders, I felt a sense of peace settle into me, as if I too had received something I had not known I was waiting for. Before ending this story, I want to leave you with a thought that lingers long after the final word is spoken. Sometimes the things we believe are lost forever are not lost at all. They are simply waiting for the moment when their meaning can be fully felt. The letter did not arrive on time, yet it arrived precisely when it mattered most. Perhaps this is true of many things in life: the unanswered conversations, the unfinished sentences, the unspoken truths. They find their way back to us when we are ready, not when we expect them. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment sharing where in the world you are watching from. Your presence here keeps stories like this alive, allowing them to reach others who may need them. Thank you for listening, and may you find meaning in the moments that return to you, even after many years. When I returned inside, the house felt warmer than before, as though the weight of Evelyn's memories had shifted gently into place, rather than lingering in the corners. The snow continued drifting outside, casting soft reflections across the window pane. I walked once more toward the coffee table, where the letters and keepsakes rested. Illuminated by the amber light of the lamp, the items seemed to hum with quiet significance, not ominous but solemn, like relics tied to emotions that had never truly faded. As I sat down, I found myself wondering about the man in the photograph. Who was he to Evelyn? What words had passed between them? And what had kept their truths suspended so long in silence? The unanswered nature of these questions did not frustrate me. Rather, it drew me deeper into the story, urging me to consider the fragile threads that connect people across a lifetime. Later that evening, I searched through a small wooden drawer in the hallway that I had overlooked earlier. Inside, I found a stack of old postcards tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Each postcard featured winter scenes, snow-covered bridges, frozen lakes, quiet villages under nights illuminated by lanterns. but none of them were addressed or written on. It felt as though Evelyn had purchased them with the intention of sending them to someone. Yet each remained unwritten, waiting for a moment that never came. As I held them, I realized they echoed the same sentiment as the letter hidden in the tree. All the words she never spoke, preserved in objects rather than conversations. I placed the postcards next to the tin and looked around the room one more time. Something still felt incomplete, like the story had one more whisper tucked away in the stillness of the house. My gaze drifted toward the fireplace, where a set of ceramic figurines lined the mantel, each intricately painted with winter motifs, carolers, a miniature sleigh, a tiny choir. One figure stood out, a tall, slender angel whose wings were slightly chipped. Something about the way it leaned forward caught my attention. I picked it up carefully, feeling its cold surface warm slightly against my hand. The base felt heavier than expected, and when I turned it over, I discovered a small metal latch hidden beneath the glaze. The latch opened with a soft click, revealing a hollow compartment inside the figurine. Nestled within was a small folded scrap of paper, yellowed by age but still intact. My breath caught as I unfolded it, revealing a short message written in the same delicate handwriting. "I keep this here because I cannot let myself forget." The note read, "Every Christmas, I tell myself I will find the courage to say what my heart has carried. And every Christmas, the fear becomes stronger than the hope." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that pressed gently against my chest. It was clear this message had been written long after the one hidden in the wooden ornament. Evelyn had kept this truth close, revisiting it each year, wrestling with the same quiet ache. Beneath the note, tucked deeper into the figurine, was a photograph, this one barely larger than a postage stamp and faded almost to sepia. It showed Evelyn and the young man standing beside a wooden fence, winter fields stretching beyond them. Their faces were turned toward one another rather than the camera, captured in a moment of genuine connection. The photograph radiated warmth even through its age, and I could sense the tenderness embedded in the moment. They looked as though they were sharing something unspoken, something delicate and deeply felt. But the photograph also bore a strange loneliness, as if it were the last visual trace of a bond that had faded into memory, long before either of them intended. I placed the angel figurine back on the mantel carefully, sensing that it belonged exactly where it had been for all those years. Every hidden note, every preserved object, every carefully placed memento seemed to form a constellation of quiet confessions, each meant to anchor memories she was too afraid to voice. Evelyn hadn't been hiding a scandal. She had been hiding tenderness, longing, and the sorrow of paths diverged too soon. She had stitched her truth into the small rituals of Christmas, allowing herself to remember without reopening wounds she couldn't heal. Feeling the house growing darker around me, I turned on another lamp, casting warm light across the floor. I began piecing together the timeline in my mind, the first letter hidden in the tree, the tiny note in the ornament, the message concealed within the angel figurine. 3 separate moments of vulnerability, each written at different times in her life. Taken together, they formed a single narrative, a story of love deferred, perhaps lost, but never forgotten. The deeper I went, the more I felt her presence, not as a ghost or shadow, but as someone whose emotions had clung to the world in the gentle places where she had left them. I decided to search one final spot, the old piano in the corner of the room. Its keys were yellowed, and a thin film of dust covered its surface. I lifted the fall board, revealing untouched notes that hummed quietly under my fingertips. Something compelled me to check the piano bench. Inside, I found a sealed envelope, this one untouched by wear, as though it had been preserved in a quieter corner of Evelyn's heart. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a longer letter, written more steadily, more confidently. "If you ever see this," the letter began, "know that I wrote it not out of regret, but out of gratitude for the part of my life you shaped. I no longer fear the truth. I simply regret that I waited so long to understand it." The letter continued in a tone that felt calmer than the earlier messages. Evelyn wrote about how she had lived a full life, even if a quiet one. She had found contentment in small things, though a small corner of her heart always returned to that winter when everything had changed. And though she never sent the letter, she described finding peace in accepting that some loves are meant to shape us. without staying beside us. "I hope you found your own peace," she wrote. "I hope your winters were warm, even if ours grew cold." I folded the letter with care, placing it back inside the envelope before returning it to the piano bench. The room felt fuller now, as though the house itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Every hidden piece of Evelyn's story had risen to the surface, not demanding attention but offering understanding. She had loved deeply, quietly, and completely, and though her truth had never been spoken aloud, it had remained intact through the care with which she preserved it. As I looked around the house one last time, I felt that the secret Evelyn thought should never be revealed had found its way into the open, not to disrupt or wound, but to free her memory from solitude. The story she carried alone for so many years had finally found a witness, and in that witnessing, something gentle had shifted, perhaps for me, perhaps for her, or perhaps for the quiet spaces between us where memory lingers the longest. Morning light seeped through the curtains in soft golden stripes, settling gently across the living room floor as though trying to warm the memories resting there. I stood quietly beside the old Christmas tree, the branches now appearing softer and less burdened, as if the truth they had guarded for decades had finally been released from their brittle needles. The house no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful, still quiet, still old, still wrapped in the kind of silence that lingers after a long life lived alone, but no longer holding its breath. I sensed that Evelyn's story, once locked away in hidden corners and forgotten ornaments, had risen like dust dancing in the morning light, finally acknowledged, finally understood. I gathered the envelopes, the notes, the wooden ornament, and the delicate photograph and placed them gently inside a small box I found beneath the table, not to hide them again, but to preserve them properly, to make sure they would no longer be fragments scattered across a life no one remembered. As I closed the lid, I found myself whispering a quiet promise into the stillness of the room, one she never asked for but somehow deserved. I promised that her truth would not disappear again, that it would not fade back into silence or remain tucked away in the branches of an attic tree. It would live on through understanding, through acknowledgement, through compassion. Before leaving the house, I returned to her bedroom one final time. The window overlooked the quiet street where snow continued to fall in slow, graceful spirals. An old blanket lay folded at the foot of her bed, softened by years of use. I ran my hand along its edge, imagining all the winter she had spent here, wrapped not just in warmth but in memories she never shared. There was a gentle ache in that thought, an ache not of sadness, but of witnessing someone's inner world long after they were gone. It reminded me that so many lives hold entire universes no one ever sees. On the dresser sat the chipped-wing angel, still watching over the room with its tilted posture. I paused to look at it one last time. Its hidden note had carried one of the clearest pieces of her heart, a confession written not for someone else, but for herself, an acknowledgement of fear, hope, and longing all twisted together in a single fragile thread. I wondered how many times she had picked up that figurine during Christmas seasons, how many times she had tucked the note back inside after reading it, still unable to let the truth go, yet unable to erase it either. That small angel, imperfect and worn, had protected a piece of her soul no one ever knew existed. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something I had overlooked earlier, a small nail near the doorframe where a decoration must have once hung. A faint outline on the wallpaper suggested a wreath or wooden sign had been there for years. Perhaps Evelyn had taken it down during her last winter, or maybe it had simply fallen. The image of something once cherished slowly slipping from its place felt strangely symbolic, mirroring her own story, something loved, something lost, something never expressed fully enough before time moved quietly past it. When I reached the front door, I turned back to take one final look at the home that had transformed over the course of a single night. The air felt lighter, freer, as though the house itself understood that the secret was no longer bound in the silence of its walls. It was a moment suspended in gentle closure. I switched off the light, letting the natural glow of the snow outside cast a soft shimmer through the windows. The house did not feel abandoned. It felt at rest. Outside, the cold winter breeze brushed against my face, carrying with it the crisp scent of snow and pine. I held the box of Evelyn's memories close to my chest as I walked down the front steps. The snow crunched softly under my boots, each step echoing faintly in the stillness. The world was quiet. No cars, no voices, just the sound of winter settling into the neighborhood. I paused at the gate and glanced back one more time, imagining her standing in the doorway decades earlier, watching the snow fall in the same quiet way. Perhaps thinking of the man in the photograph. Perhaps wishing she had found the courage to send the letter she hid so tenderly. As I continued down the path, I felt something shift inside me, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but a soft awakening. The story she had hidden, the love she had carried silently for so long, revealed something profound about the human condition, that sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we leave unspoken, and sometimes those truths survive long after we are gone, preserved in unexpected places, waiting for someone willing to look closely enough to see them. I reached my car and placed the box gently on the passenger seat. Before starting the engine, I sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Evelyn's story had changed me, not in a loud, transformative way, but in the subtle manner of a lesson learned through someone else's longing. It reminded me that silence can be loud, that unspoken words can alter the trajectory of a life, and that secrets are not always meant to be hidden out of shame, but because the heart sometimes struggles to find the courage it needs. As the engine hummed to life, I looked at the house one final time before driving away. Snow continued to fall, blanketing everything in a soft white glow, like a final gesture of peace over a story that had waited so patiently to be heard. I realized then that the envelope hidden in the branches of the old tree had never been meant to protect a secret. It had been meant to protect a memory, one Evelyn cherished deeply, but feared would unravel her if she faced it again. And in discovering it, the story had not been ruined. It had been honored. And as I drove down the quiet street, the reflection settled into my mind with clarity. We often underestimate how deeply a single unspoken truth can shape an entire lifetime. Evelyn taught me that silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is a shelter for feelings too fragile to survive the world outside. She taught me that love can persist even when it is never confessed, and that some chapters are written not in words, but in the spaces between them. And now, her truth, once hidden in an old Christmas tree, has a voice again. If this story reached you the way it reached me, then allow its message to stay with you. Speak when your heart trembles. Express what you fear might go unheard, and never underestimate the weight of moments you choose to keep to yourself. Life is too brief to bury what matters most. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Also activate the notification bell so you can be alerted about our future posts. See you in the next video.